Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom or Tom. How's it going?
I wouldn't say it's as always because number one, first practice of fall camp, which is exciting. Number two, we're vertical today because reasons. It doesn't matter. We're not here to talk about. Tony, it's the first day of fall camp.
I can talk about it.
It's the first day of fall camp. We're all just trying to work through some things, trying to keep things simple, trying to keep things on task.
Yeah.
Big focus, Tony, is just we got to be ready for the Akron game when things really start to matter.
That's right. This is it's first day of fall camp, so it takes some. You're not at full speed yet. We're not at full speed, but we are here. Got done talking to Ryan Day for about 35-ish minutes after watching 2 hours of practice number one of fall camp for the Buckeyes, and where to begin? We did get to see all of practice. There's been so much talk about Jeremiah Smith. And he did have a nice catch today. I don't think there's been enough talk about Carnell Tate. And as we're both watching practice today, you had mentioned that Carnell Tate's having a really good day. And this was, I think, after he had a really nice catch on the sideline, going up and making a catch over, I believe, Calvin Simpson Hunt, perhaps. But that was just one of the catches he made. It was a standout all day long. Maybe it's time to get back to where we were a year ago at this time, talking about Carnell Tate.
Yeah, Carnell Tate last year was the new and shiny true freshman, and boy, is he going to have an amazing year. And he had a very solid freshman year with Ohio State. But now there's a new and shiny thing. And, you know, while I am thinking Jeremiah Smith will probably ultimately have the bigger and shinier receiving totals and all that kind of stuff by the time his career is done, you don't want to forget about Carnell Tate because he was really impressive. And you got to remember, half the time he's going up against the number one corners, which there is no day off there. There is no like, oh well, good, I'm on this side of the field, so things are going to be easy. There is no easy side of the field against this Ohio State defense this year. So for him to it felt like every time you looked up, he was making a catch, sometimes making a catch and a run, and just was very consistent. And I said that to you halfway through practice, and then the second half of practice was just as impressive as the first.
Yeah, Ryan Day talked about him afterwards, saying he just always came in, has been a professional, he's quiet, so you don't hear him, but you feel him on the field. And I think that's pretty good quality for a young guy, as they say. But impressive performance today. We'll be back watching more of it tomorrow as well. Now that people are on, we can start talking about the quarterbacks, I guess. I thought, and Ryan Day said it, Will Howard had more zip on it than he did in the spring. He's stronger, has changed his body some, came in, and they said immediately they went to work on having him drop weight and then add better weight and get faster, stronger, all of that stuff. But said he looked good. And the way they had him repping today, when they were all together, it was Devin Brown, then Will Howard, then Lincoln Keenholz, then Julian Sayin, then Aaron Noland, but they're all doing the same number of reps. It would be like 2 at a time or whatever. And then when they were on split fields, it was Will Howard and Julian Sayin on one field and the other 3 quarterbacks on another. Any standouts for you? Like, you're not facing any kind of a rush. It's very basic right now.
Right, and I think that day one, I am hesitant to draw any real firm conclusions because it's, half the time you're working with the number 2 offensive line and you're working with the number 2 receivers, and then half the time you're working against the number 1 defense, and they were just kind of rotating through, and it was kind of everyone was getting about the same number of reps, so you didn't get 10 reps back to back of Will Howard and Devin Brown working with the same guys against the same defense. So that you really never got an apples to apples. I felt like Will Howard looked bigger. I have a picture of Will Howard next to Julian Sayin, and Julian Sayin looks like a guy who is a true freshman, and Will Howard looks like a guy who's been in college for 5 years. Will Howard is huge. Will Howard is a big dude. Arm strength looked, as Ryan Day said, good today. I think if I'm going to take anything away from the day, and I really don't want to draw any real firm conclusions, but I wasn't watching every rep, but Julian Sayin feels like he does a great job of just taking care of the football. Like, I didn't see, you saw some interceptions out of different guys, and it's practice one, who really cares. I didn't see any interceptions out of Julian Sayin, any like real mistakes or throwing into tight coverage. It was kind of managing things, making good choices. You know, that as a true freshman, does that mean he's starting day one? No, probably not. But as a true freshman, that's good. That's impressive. I'm sure they were not playing incredibly complex coverage schemes and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, he's probably going to get confused at some point during fall camp. But you know, of the very little that I want to sort of take away, it was kind of like, oh, that's, you know, that was really good for a first practice of your true freshman fall camp kind of day.
Yeah, and we got to see basically what is 7-on-7 essentially, and I think there's only maybe one coverage stack all day long that I saw, and that was Aaron Nolan.
It's funny you said that, and I'm like, well, I think I only saw one too, and it was Aaron Nolan. So yeah, I think it was probably just the one all day. Now, this is 7-on-7, so it's not pass rush.
No.
It's not.
And there's plenty of a lot of it is just dump offs and things like that. You never go broke taking a profit type of thing. You just want to continue to stay on target, stay on schedule, and they did that. Devin Brown looked pretty comfortable running the ball. He was keeping it on some reads. Didn't see Will Howard doing that as much, but clearly he's got that in his bag. Speaking of running, Quinshon Judkins, I don't know if you've seen him on the video game.
I have. I saw fewer spin moves than I was expecting today.
He's got this legendary spin move on the video game, but he's still pretty quick out there. And I think he was listed at 218 or 219 on the official roster that we got today. And he doesn't look like it's holding him back in terms of his quickness, because he had one long one like right up the middle, making guys miss. Very, very good. And of course, Travion is what he is. And both guys were used in the passing game as well with the dump offs, because like I said, the quarterback's getting rid of the ball pretty quickly. We only saw a handful of deep throws today, so this was a very basic. But those two guys, Quinshon, he impressed me today by his quickness in traffic.
And, you know, this is one where you were talking about Devin Brown and how good Devin Brown looked running the ball. It was kind of like evaluating a running back at a camp is notoriously difficult because you're not actually doing it. It's like evaluating a running back during the spring game where they're playing thud. They're playing thud all day. I think I might have seen 2 people get tackled all practice, and they were immediately yelled at for tackling people. So, you know, that is obviously not a great time to evaluate running backs. But, yeah, I mean, he looked, you know, you're supposed to look good in these kind of settings, and he looked good in that setting. And Devin Brown looked impressive running the ball, and the chances that we got to see him run the ball. It was interesting to watch the running backs, and there's only 4 of them out there. And you know, intellectually, you have known since Dallin Hayden left for Colorado and since T.C. Caffey got hurt, you knew there are 4 running backs, there are 4 scholarship running backs, and you know, so you know that's sort of, it feels like a thin room. But then to see it out there, it's like, oh boy, that's really kind of a thin room. You've got, you know, Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, where you feel like you know what you got. You know what they're going to get out of those guys. James Peoples, I was impressed with a little bit I got to see of James Peoples. Sam Williams-Dixon is, you know, he's the 4th guy out there, and boy, you get to the 4th guy relatively quickly in these drills. So
yeah,
that, you know, more quarterbacks than running backs is a kind of weird roster setup, and you know, not necessarily one that they were setting out to have this year.
Yeah, and I think they've got 2 walk-ons out there as well to help that out. But Ryan Day did say after practice, he went back and looked like, how often are we needing that 5th running back, and how often do we have that 5th running back? He's like, we don't need it that often. You don't need it. They haven't used it that often, but yet you also have that 5th running back or 4th running back has sometimes been Xavier Johnson.
Right.
Chip Trainum, so they've had to manufacture some depth there when there hasn't been as much as they needed. And he said they'll be great as long as everybody stays healthy. It's the healthy aspect. It's losing one of Travion Henderson or Quinshon Judkins where everything now becomes a real issue. Because he said they're going to need James Peoples and Sam Williams-Dixon both this year. And you can't really lose anybody, because then at that point you're talking about, okay, now the contingency plans, one of those guys has to be like the 4th running back.
Right, yeah.
Or the 3rd.
Brandon Innes, I mean, that's someone that we've talked about, I think, in the past. I know Caleb Downs. There was a lot of headlines around Caleb Downs. I think the number of headlines will probably exceed the number of carries that Caleb Downs has this year. But, you know, that's certainly a possibility, at least. They're gonna mix and match. And, you know, there is no shortage of athletes on this team. And, you know, if they need to find someone, they can find someone, and they can, you know, they have moved linebackers. They have moved, you know, you can run 4 wide out sets and be okay, and they still have something of a luxury where you're looking at Travion Henderson and Quinton Judkins, and it's like, boy, if they lose one of those guys, they'll only have one of the best running backs in the country. Like, boy, that's that is a situation so dire that only about 127 teams in the country would trade with Ohio State in that case.
That's a good point. And not knowing how much the quarterback is going to run some, that takes a load off of some of that pressure off of needing that fifth running back. We talked in the past of when you have JT Barrett, you don't need a third. Good luck with a third running back getting any carries of meaning.
Yep.
This won't be that, but it's like, well, good luck getting that fifth running back carries. And it's not a concern yet. It's just something to pay attention to. Let's move to tight ends. Well, let's talk a little bit about Jeremiah Smith.
So I saw Jeremiah Smith had one significant, real big, deep catch. And as you said, there was a lot of short and intermediate routes. There was not a lot of deep shots. So that was one. I was looking at the other field. You were watching that field. Long down the right sideline. I did not see who he was working against. I also did not see who threw that ball. Who was that threw that ball? Because it was a long completion down the right sideline, and it was just kind of like, oh. And going the other direction with some people between me and him, and it was just kind of like, oh, there he is doing the thing that he does again.
Yeah, it was Will Howard to Jeremiah Smith with Calvin Simpson Hunt in coverage.
Okay.
And he went up, brought it down. I think Simpson Hunt fell down, and then he just continued running.
Yep.
Like we've seen it basically going down that way in the spring here in the practice field. So that's what those are the big plays and the splash plays. But he's also catching 6-yard curls and 8-yard outs and ins and like all of these little things that just move the chain. He's so comfortable. He the ball is just swallowed up by his hands. Like he's got really good hands and is strong and doesn't necessarily go down on the first guy tackling him. Like if you're trying to arm tackle him, forget about it. So it's there's a lot going on. I was glad that the people got to see, although. The fans were on the far side of the field where it was happening, but he did what we expected, so that was good.
Yeah, every time we see him, it feels like he has at least one of those, like, oh, look at that. And he had another one today. And we've talked about Carnell Tate already having a very impressive day. Jeremiah Smith had his sort of usual impressive day. It feels like it's kind of a Emeka Egbuka, like, oh yeah, of course, Emeka Egbuka is Emeka Egbuka and will be a top, first round-ish pick next year. So, just sort of, sure, why not? Of course, there is no news there.
Well, and as expected, he was in the slot.
Yes, yep, and got a chance to see Mylan Graham in person for the first time. He is bigger than, he is bigger than he used to be. He looks. I mean, he's a tall guy. He does not look like he's a little skinny guy who just got to campus and only been working in a college strength program for, a month and a half. He already looks like, oh, he's big enough that I could see him potentially having some kind of a role this year.
Yeah, I think he was listed at like 170, 175 in the spring, or not spring roster, but the signing day roster. They have him at 6'1", 185 right now, wearing number 5, which...
if you were trying to dissuade people from making Garrett Wilson comps, that's not the best way to do it.
But yeah, it was good to finally get him out here. Finally have some photos that aren't from camp in June, which is nice. And as Ryan Day said at Big Ten Media Days, they'll see what happens with him being a junior arrival. Demarion Witten playing receiver as well, number 81. See what happens with him because of arriving in June. They're a little bit behind everybody else that is in that room. They've got some walk-ons are making the plays. Was it Dorian Williams? The true freshman, 84, walk-on was making some catches as well. So
David Adolph continues to make plays. Yeah.
And so what you have with all. And Jaden Ballard, nothing deep, but again, there was not a lot deep.
Yeah.
He had some catches. Coach Ranch we saw with a couple of catches.
Bryson Rogers had a couple.
And Brandon Innes over the middle, out of the slot as well. So they're getting as many guys involved as they can because, when you're running 2 fields, you can do that.
Right, yeah, and they are running 2 fields. They are literally running the same thing on 2 different fields. It was interesting. One field, it felt like they were huddling more often. So I was wondering if they had the green dot helmets on one field and then not on the other, because they were on the left field. They were huddling field 1. They were huddling more, it felt like, than field 2. This is all very scientific and based on looking over there and going, boy, it feels like they're huddling a lot over there. But that's another one of those things
Science
that they're sort
is
of
big on feels.
yes,
and thinks.
yes. Just use the force, as they say on Star Trek.
I mean, it is interesting because the offenses were all split up. Like you had like the left guard and left tackle, the ones with the twos of the right side, and so the offensive line is mixed and matched. But from what I saw, it was the first team defense on one side, second team defense on another, and not that we can just go ahead and go to the defense, but Sonny Styles was with the ones at will linebacker. Everything else was as expected. I think the only other like noticeable thing was for me was Jermaine Matthews is at nickel again, as he was in the spring. I thought Gabe Powers had a pretty good day. He stayed with I think it was Quinshon Judkins on a wheel route, and was stride for stride on a decent throw from one of the quarterbacks. But yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to see was who was running with the ones at will. Today it was Sonny for the most part, but also C.J. Hicks was obviously in there. They're both going to play, but that was one thing I wanted to check off the box for day one. We'll see about day 2, 3, 4, and so on.
Yeah, and I think the coverage was sort of as expected. You're running a lot of 7-on-7, which the offense should win a bunch in 7-on-7, and the offense did win a bunch in 7-on-7. But you had a number of times where there was at one point you said back-to-back interceptions on one field, and you've got you had some nice pass breakups and that kind of stuff, and you're starting to see a little bit of what this defense can be. The second team defense is obviously a drop off from the first team, but it's not. There have been years when, like the offense, for example, when the second team offensive line can't get it together, it's like, oh boy, that will just derail a whole practice. You didn't really see that, but the defense looked really solid. Even the presumptive first team type quarterbacks going up against the second team defense, it wasn't just like picking them apart, and a lot of 7-on-7, as I said, so offensive line didn't really factor into it in that way today. But I didn't see anything really unexpected in a negative way, I don't think.
No, we did not watch much punting. I didn't, so I can't critique that just yet.
I watched some of it. There was Nick McLarty. There were some snaps that he wasn't happy with where the snap, and I think that's sort of just critiquing guys. And it was not John Furlman, who is the returning starter at long snapper. He was working with one of the younger walk-ons, and so you're kind of critiquing that kind of stuff.
And the thing with Australian punters, they need a left-handed snapper so the ball comes in the direction that they're used to from their hemispheres. So,
Smart. Yes, the Coriolis effect on special teams.
Speaking of snapping, Luke Montgomery was doing some snapping, played some center today. Carson Hinsman was not here today. He was ill. He'll be back tomorrow, Ryan Day said. So I don't know if that was the cause of that. I think Luke Montgomery can play everywhere. So you're trying to fit him in, and maybe you don't want to necessarily turn to a redshirt freshman like Josh Padilla just yet in case something were to happen. Like there's a long line of centers before you would get to that point. But he's a guy that has some versatility. I believe towards the end of practice, right at the end, he did have a bad snap, Montgomery. And so whether it's the quarterback or the center, when there's a bad snap, they have to do a lap. And so I think it may have been saying at that point, I can't remember which quarterback, but they took off, and then Montgomery started to take off, but then practice got ended, so he went right to the huddle. But you talk about the 2 interceptions. That was Lincoln Keenholz and Aaron Nolan back-to-back. And they threw the interceptions. Lincoln Keenholz goes for his lap, and next play, Aaron Nolan throws his, and then it's like they're running parallel laps there.
Well, what's interesting about that, and that this is not a new thing. We've seen this over the years, but I think it does sort of give you an indication that they value the guy who doesn't make the mistake. If you're the quarterback, they want you to be able to make plays. They want you to make the right read. They want you to, but you don't. The biggest thing for the quarterback this year at Ohio State is, don't make the big mistake. Don't make the big one mistake. And you got a couple games last year where the Michigan game, the first touchdown they gave up was the quarterback made the big mistake. And the last interception was not necessarily on Common Board, but the game-winning drive against Notre Dame, if there's a Notre Dame linebacker with a better set of hands, Kyle McCord makes the big mistake there too. And that's one of those things where there's so much talent on this team, on offense, on defense, all around the field. on the coaching staff. Like, they got it all. You just can't lose it. And I think that that's a good indication of where the mindset is, which is why I brought up what I brought up earlier with Julian saying, where you were just kind of watching, and it was like, I see what they like about him, because yeah, he's young, yeah, he's not built like Will Howard yet, but he doesn't make, again, this is practice one of the fall. This is not a final proclamation, but based on what we saw in practice one, I didn't see any big mistakes, and that's probably something that's working in his favor.
Yeah. Do we have questions?
We have lots of questions. Let's scroll back up to the top and start with Drowsy Dragon. When will Day name Howard the starter at QB? He needs many first-team reps as possible.
Ryan Day did say he'd like to have somebody named within a week to 10 days, a week or 2 weeks. But he said that's what you always want. It doesn't always turn out that way like last year. So he'd like to, but it's not up to him. It's up to the quarterbacks.
Yeah, and that has been a little on the early side. I think even Justin Fields, I went back and looked at this a week or two ago, and I think Justin Fields was like August 18th or something like
18th
that.
Or
now,
19th, CJ Stroud.
something like that, yeah. Now, this year, the season is a little earlier. Normally,
Yeah.
fall camp starts on August 4th, August 5th, so, maybe you want to do the, run this through the conversion, the currency exchange, and August 18th or 19th works out to more like August 14th or 15th. But, they're going to, after this week, go from all 5 guys are getting basically the same number of reps to, okay, you're going to start paring that down a little bit. And then, but you're still going to have, I'm sure, a week or maybe week and a half, 2 weeks of, really nailing it down. I would be pretty surprised if, August 10th, we had a firm and final answer on it.
I would be very surprised as well. That also coincides with perhaps the first Saturday scrimmage. I don't know if it happens that early, but you got to start getting them in here if the season's
Right.
on the 31st.
Well, and that's, I would guess August 10th would be the first
Right.
scrimmage, and so that's going to be one where I'm sure we'll be invited. But no,
I don't know,
no.
Tom.
Am I not reading the room correctly? No. That's one where they want to see the guys in the stadium. They want to see the guys in a real game situation, because you can do 7-on-7. There's no pass rush. There's no you want to be in as game like a situation as you can and have as much information as you can. I'm going to guess after August 17th. If that's like, say, the second scrimmage of the fall. After that is when you're going to maybe have, that's when I would start to sort of look for a decision. Maybe you get surprised and you get one earlier, but that
I would agree with that.
Jordan Kapler says thoughts on Will Howard's improvements between spring and now.
I think that's what we heard from Day at the Big Ten Media Days, and also from Denzel Burke, the Ohio State Arbiter of Truth, that Will Howard looked better, got better over the summer, noticeably in terms of the arm strength, and Day mentioned how the ball came out of his hand better. He was more accurate. But again, day one, as Ryan Day keeps saying, as we keep trying to say, day one, but encouraging in that it's not like one of these things where you're like, ooh.
Yeah, right.
Where you see a complete, like, if you see a difference between Will Howard and Devin Brown, like Will Howard is not living up to what Devin Brown is doing. Like, he's surpassing what he did in the spring, which is what you want, but also his level is higher or as high as anybody, and it's not noticeably lower than anybody. So I think Day's happy with him, so Buckeye fans probably should be too.
Aaron Taylor wants to know, is this the most talented roster ever assembled? I mean, the easy answer to that is no.
Right.
Is it in the history of college football? No.
Right.
In the history of Ohio State, I'm going to remind you, there have been 2 teams that won the national championships and basically brought everyone back. 2003, 2015. I will remind you, neither of those won the national championship. But those, out of that 2002 team, how many players off that team made the NFL? 20-something got drafted.
Yeah.
2015, you had basically everyone back from the 2014 team, and that's, loads of first-round picks. It's not, just because you're talented doesn't mean you're going to win it all. But they have, this year's team has a little bit of a mulligan that neither of those teams had, where if you have the one stupid game against Michigan State or against, Wisconsin, you get another crack at it.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of talented teams, and maybe there's overall more talent. I don't know that there is, but if it's held back by a position, then it's not a more talented team.
Right, and I think there are still. I walk out of today feeling like I have virtually no additional data on the offensive line. Because the offensive line is, I think, every Ohio State fans, or most Ohio State fans, biggest concern right now. That's the one where, if you told me, yeah, this is going to be an at least above average, top 25 kind of offensive line, that would be a real, great, cross that one off the list. Because I don't think they need to be Joe Moore award winning, but if they're one of the 10 to 15 best offensive lines in the country, that's fine. No Carson Hinsman today. That is one thing. And again, just to remind you, he's supposed to be back tomorrow. No need to panic. He's supposed to be back tomorrow, just a little illness. But let's see what the offensive line looks like against the defensive line. Because the defensive line, you feel like you kind of have a sense for what they are. Mm-hmm. So, this is not two unknowns. It's like the defensive line is a bunch of guys you've seen be very good over the years. If the offensive line can hold their own, that probably tells me something.
Well, and as Ryan Day said, you really can't tell anything about the offensive line until the pads are on and you're actually pushing guys around and hitting. So find out more than he was glowing. He had some glowing things to say about Taker Shabola. Perhaps because Shabola was getting asked about, but at least he was giving good answers on his development and his consistency, which he said, he's doing everything that he needs to do to play. And if he continues to do that, he will play a lot. I think that's Carson Hinsman's job to lose at right guard, but I don't know that I don't think he's above losing it. I think it's still an open competition.
Yeah, I think there is a way that he's not the starter on day one, but if you have Tager Shabola as, here's your worst case scenario, that feels like Day has been pretty open about the fact that there have been times when he, coming out of spring last year, he was openly worried about the offensive line. He's not openly worried about it anymore, and it feels like you've got enough answers there where, Tager Shabola is your typical first-time potential starter. Carson Hinsman was a starter all year last year. Seth McLaughlin has been a starter at Alabama for a couple of years. No snap concerns, just since you mentioned his name and everyone goes, what about that? No problem there today. So, it feels like they're going to be fine there. Are they going to be better than fine there? We'll see. It's too early in camp to really be able to give you an actual answer on that.
I've already called my shot. Joe Moore finalists.
Okay. Well, if that happens, that would be a good thing for the fine folks of
But
Columbus,
it's also helps to have a name recognition, and they do.
Yeah. So a couple on the running backs. Drowsy Dragon says losing Dallin Hayden hurts. They lack experience depth at running back, which is true. Sub-Zero says we are fine at running back. The young guys are good enough to start at other schools. That is probably also true.
Well, imagine if Dallin Hayden is here, and he's the third running back. The complaints about not being able to find snaps for James Peoples.
Yeah. Well,
especially once you get to see James Peoples.
Right. Yeah. And James Peoples, I don't know how much certainty I have on anything with him right now, just because running back, and we really haven't seen sort of live fire. But it seems like, if you had a 2021 situation where they had to, it was like, well, they got to throw the true freshman in day one. James Peoples looks like he could handle the load in terms of being at least a 15 carry a game back. I don't think he's going to be asked to do that this year, but I could see that being something where, a couple of years ago, when Evan Pryor showed up, it was like he is going to have to spend some time in the weight room before he's ready to do that. You don't have those concerns with James Peoples.
No, Tim May was hosting one of the shows on the Fan last week or this week, and he asked me the same question. He's like, if James Peoples had to be the guy as a freshman, do you think he could do what Travion Henderson or J.K. Dobbins did? I'm like, well, I think he can do. I'm expecting Dallin Hayden 2022, 100 carries, but if you give him 100 carries, he's probably going to get 600 yards. But yeah, I could see him as a 1,000-yard rusher if they needed him to be. I don't think he'll need that. But again, let's remind people, Master Teague in the second half of the 2019 season, leading, he's like top 5 rusher in the third and fourth quarter nationally, because he's just a guy in there running the ball out at the end of the games of all of the blowouts that they had that year.
Jordan Kapler wants to know who has the best celebration after a PBU. It was pretty understated today. Yeah. I feel like you get a lot of the Seatbelt Society celebrations out of guys. I think really the better question is who's the best trash talker out there. Feels like the corners all want to tell you that they are the best trash talker, and that as a unit they are the best trash talkers on the team. I feel like I would be hard pressed to vote against Denzel Burke on trash talk. Just
Anything.
anything.
Yeah, and Burke did say at the Big Ten Media Days, the safeties don't talk as much. So
Yeah, Terry Slusher says, were there any noticeable improvements from the quarterbacks? I mean, it's day one. You know, Will Howard we talked about earlier.
let's watch. Let us get to watch some scrimmaging next week. You know, when the pads are on and there is a pass rush, and then we'll have a much better idea of who's moving the ball and who's not, who's dumping it off, who's finding the open guys or throwing guys open, who's hitting the windows. Because right now there's a lot of dink and dunk in there.
Sage Ohio says, with the season starting, I hope we can forget the whole woulda, coulda, shoulda recruits for a while. Jordan Kapler says, completely agree. So tired of the recruiting talk. I get it. Just need to take a rest. And, you know, I mean, the recruiting talk is more of an off-season thing. We're going to end up talking some recruiting during the season, but that's more of an off-season thing. You asked Ryan Day about, you know, the fact that this could be an Ohio State recruiting class unlike any other before, because the scholarship limit is about to go up.
Yeah, going to go up to 105 at least, and it's going to be for next year. So you've got to. I asked him at Big Ten Media Days, "Are you going to use that entire allotment?" He's like, "Well, we're still." He said, "Yeah, we're talking. I'm talking with Ross about that. Ross Bjork, the AD, about exactly how to do that. But if you don't, other people are, so you have to. You know, that sort of thing. So having 105 scholarship players next year, I said, you know, could you have a recruiting class of 40?" And he's like, well, I don't know if it's going to be that much, but it's going to be more than normal, and it's going to be the new normal.
Ross Bjork was the AD at Ole Miss at some point, and I don't know if that was during the Houston Nutt 40-man recruiting classes.
I think it was 38 that year, and we could see 38 here. But he did talk about the tiers of recruits that they're going after now. You still have the 3 and done, but then you also have the 3 and ready, the developmental guys. And he said there's still going to be a ton of guys leaving for the portal. I want to know if maybe we start seeing more small college guys come in, and year 4, year 5, and they have that experience. I can't remember which Big Ten coach was. It was Kurt Signetti said, I'd rather have guys that have played at smaller schools than guys from bigger schools who haven't.
Yeah.
And I think you might see some of that out of the portal as well.
Christopher Sauer says, is there a sense on how the defensive line rotation will be, or if the freshman defensive backs will rotate much? You know, the defensive backs, you know, it feels like they're looking for a way to get Jermaine Matthews on the field. You know, putting him in the slot, it just feels like he's going to play somewhere. Calvin Simpson-Hunt probably going to play some. It's real hard to take Denzel Burke, Davis Nigbinos, and Jordan Hancock off the field. If someone's hurt, sure, but if you know, I don't think you're willingly taking those guys off the field in like really meaningful spots. Defensive line, they feel good about the depth there, especially at the end spots. You're going to see more rotation, I think, because they feel pretty good about Caden Curry. They feel pretty good about Kenyatta Jackson. You're starting to see Mitchell Melton's been there a million years. You've got, you know, Edric Houston. Just Edric Houston looked bigger today too. I looked at him and I was like, oh, he's gotten he looks like he's gotten bigger and stronger since the spring. You know, there's talent there. There is a path to the field there. These guys are going to play. It's more to me a question: are they going to play in the first halves of games, or is it going to be they're going to get, you know, 20, 30 snaps, but it's all going to be after halftime?
And I think Jermaine Matthews is a guy that can play in the first half and be perfectly fine with that. If you guys can go ahead and like this video, hit the thumbs up, and subscribe if you have not. We're going to be, it's fall camp season, so we're going to be going live and dropping videos like crazy now. So would appreciate that. In terms of the young guys, Aaron Scott running with the 2s because Jermaine Matthews is at nickel, so he's running with the second team at corner. Had some matchups with JJ Smith today as well.
Jay Willie Super Chat says, hear anything about Mylan Graham? He was not a super big topic of conversation afterwards, but you know, I mentioned I put a picture up on our board, the huddle board presented by Jeff Ruby Steakhouse at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Threw up a bunch of pictures from practice today up in the thread there, and he looks bigger than I expected. He looks more physically ready to potentially play this year than I was expecting. So, you know, from that perspective, this is also, you know, he just came in the summer. Had he come in the spring, I think we might be having a different conversation about him. This is first practice of his college career, so I'm not going to draw any real firm conclusions, but he didn't look out of place out there.
No, he didn't. And, you know, Ryan Day said it last week, like, slots 4 through 7 are wide open right now. They're available for anybody. So there's nothing that says you can't come and do it. Now, Chris Olave was maybe the last to come in June and work his way into the 2 deep. I'm not expecting that.
But that was Halloween. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And it was also not this necessarily high level of top heavy receivers. And so, but maybe I was just thinking maybe he looks bigger because everybody's wearing the Guardian caps.
Yeah, well, that was actually new today. I had that on my list of things to talk about, where they, the like padded helmets. Remember Mark Kelso from the Bills, who had the like big double helmet back in the day? The padded helmets, it was like an optional thing last year. This year, everyone's doing it. So I don't know if that's an NCAA rule or just a, why would you not have something else on? I'm like, yeah, it looks a little goofy, but
if everybody's doing it, then
right?
it's
Yeah,
in
if everyone's
style.
doing it, then it's just USA Hockey for youth hockey just instituted a new rule this year that everyone has to wear a neck guard, neck protection, whether it's a shirt or like a neck guard thing, because there was a player over in England who got killed by getting one of his arteries cut by a skate. You get the sense that that's probably everyone's doing it, so this probably an everyone's doing it thing.
They should put the black stripes on the Guardian caps.
I did think that it was interesting. Now we don't know who still has the black stripe immediately. We're going to wrap this up in just a few minutes, but Jordan Kapler wants to know, is Buckeye Huddle the most talented media group with the exception of Tom, of course?
You know what? I like this question because Jordan Kapler looked like he was going to make a heel turn on me a couple days ago. So, great question. Thank you for that. I will send you a super chat for that.
A couple questions about the offensive line, and the answer on the offensive line is they didn't. How did they look against the edge rushers? We really didn't see that. So there was a question about blocking schemes. We didn't really see a lot of that.
I don't think we saw the offensive line go against the defensive line at all.
I don't think so. It really was not. That was just not that.
They were all in individual drills.
Yeah. Let's see. Christopher Sowers, was there any real notice of Chip's running scheme? Not really. I mean, they were running all the same kind of read, and it's like individual drills. Like the thumbnail for this video, if you look at it, it's, I think, Julian saying handing the ball off to Quinshon Judkins. They're not running like a full play. It's just like we're working on handing off and reading and whatever. They did that last year too. That's like super basic day one stuff, just one-on-one kind of stuff.
Yeah, and the first few snaps were like in slow motion, just basically walkthroughs.
Let's see. Damon wants to know, how was the focus on the day? How was the energy? I mean, looked like an Ohio State fall practice, and Ryan Day talked about the fact that anyone who is not over the summer doing the run through the tape +2 kind of thing.
Yeah.
Anyone who's not doing that was getting corrected. Like the veteran players who are back for a reason, and they are going to make sure everyone's doing stuff correctly.
It was the players correcting.
It was the players correcting it. Yeah. So that's that's a positive thing. Let's see. OSU Buckeyes said just subscribe and like. Good. That is a great idea. Everyone else should do that as well. Ohio 7715. Who was the most physically dominating player on the field? I mean, we didn't really see. I mean, I guess the answer is Jeremiah Smith, but that just feels like that's kind of always the answer. Carnell Tate was very dominating in.
And the thing is, like, there's no tackling, there's no hitting.
Right.
They want everybody to stay up, and you are going. You might have Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate going against third teamers or walk-ons. So, but those two guys stood out as I think they're going to tend to do the rest of the camp as well.
There was I see Connor Stallion's response in there. They did let fans in there. They did sell tickets, so I did take a moment to shoot pictures of all just down the fence, just in case. You never know, Tony, when you might need a photo like that.
I'm going to stay away from it. I'm going to cope in silence, if I will. Is that it?
That is it. Yes, we've run through, and we're got to wrap up because we need to be out of here in just a few minutes.
Yes, we do. So I want to thank you all for tuning in. Again, thank you guys for the likes and the subscribes and all of that. We're going to be back tomorrow at some point here. I assume we'll do something. We'll figure it out. But thank you all for tuning in. Find us, of course, at BuckeyeHuddle.com, YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle as well. Thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you guys later.